seminar. Mr. Muller here, and in today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to find arguments. Now, in our first video, we talked about how to look at them, find out what an argument is. In our second video, we were looking at how to analyze arguments. I give you an argument, a poem, a video, a reading, and you're able to break it down to really understand and analyze those arguments. Today, we're going to talk about how you can start to create arguments for any assignment that I give you or any assignment that you get in university. Very important lesson. Really excited about this. Hope you're excited too. Let's get started. Now, first thing we have to talk about, let's say you're now going to write an argumentative piece, whether it's a causal argument, a proposal argument, a rebuttal argument, a definition argument. First thing you have to understand is an argument is not persuasion. You're not just trying to say, you know what, all college students need free healthcare. They should really have free healthcare. Don't you want to agree with me? Think about all the good things that'll happen. Free healthcare, yeah. An argument is a claim, which again, if we're looking at our AP glossary, a claim is a statement made about an issue that asserts a perspective. However, you need reasons to support that claim. Now, when you have that reason, that's really the crux of creating an argument. It's having a perspective and using reasons to support it along with evidence. Instead of just trying to persuade me by sounding really good and saying, you know, that sounds like a really good argument. All college students need health care. Well, unless you have valid reasons, it's not an argument. And honestly, no one's going to care for the most part. Now let's talk about the basics of what an argument actually is. And the word because is essential when it comes to an argument. Now there are lots of different ways you can write that word. It doesn't have to be because, it can be as a result of or due to. But that word because shows that there is a reason. It supports the claim with a reason. It's the link between the reason and the claim. Because let's be honest. A lot of times, no one's really going to accept your perspective unless you have some valid reasons to go along with it. Honey, I think we should buy a new car. Okay, what are your reasons? Well, I don't have any. Then we're not getting a new car. Sometimes, one reason is enough. Sometimes you're going to need a series of claims with reasons and evidence to really support an argument. So when you write an argument, always think of what is my statement, what is my because. So here's an example for you. And again, I've been using this throughout our video so far. Students should have health insurance. Yeah, man. College students in the States, you get hurt, you don't have insurance, you are in trouble. But if all I make is the statement, all I'm trying to be is persuasive. I'm not making an argument. The link is because now I need a reason. You could say it's a constitutional right as an American citizen. The government is empowered by the people to protect its citizens. Therefore, it should provide health insurance to students who are trying to better themselves to better the country as a whole. Now, the important thing to think about, let's say we take that claim and that reason. You always have to think about challenges to that. If all you do is write an essay, an argumentative essay, and say, here's my claim, here's my reasons, doesn't that all sound really great? I'm going to say, no, that doesn't sound great. You haven't taken into account any possible counter arguments to your claim. For instance, other people in the US do not have free health insurance. Why should students get it? Why not people who are mentally disabled, who are poor? What about people who recently lost a job? Why is it that you're choosing students over any other group? Well, honestly, you're going to have to make a case for that in your essay. So, when you're writing, it's tough to counter other arguments. Because if you were having a conversation with me, I could say, well, have you thought about this? Well, what about this? And then you'd respond, but you don't normally think about that when you're writing. So when you're writing, make sure you're specific about what you're claiming. Don't just say everyone should have free healthcare. Well, all right, that's really broad. So remember, students, free healthcare. Now think about your readers and the values that your readers have. you're going to be writing to a particular audience. What do they think? If I'm going to be writing to a bunch of people in Massachusetts about why students should have free healthcare, I'm going to make different reasons and support it with different evidence than if I was doing it with people in, let's say, Alabama. There's different values and perspectives in those different states about healthcare, especially the Affordable Healthcare Act right now. Think about what questions and objections your readers are going to have. Don't just throw out your claim and your reason and say, there it is, isn't it great? If you're not giving any sort of acknowledgement to the counter arguments, then you're really not making a strong argument. So let's say you write an argumentative essay, or you make an argumentative documentary or music video, or you do an argumentative performance on something. Here's what we're going to expect from you, me as a reader or a listener or a viewer. First, I want a claim that is interesting, not red light cameras are bad. I really don't care about that. I don't want to read another sentence of what you're about to say. It's not interesting. Pick a topic that will make me go, huh, let's see if you can prove that. Make me want to find out more with your claim. That's why it's incredibly important to have strong claims and thesis statements and any sort of argumentative piece of writing or piece of media. You have to have also at least one good reason, depending on the assignment. Sometimes it's multiple good reasons, so I can take you seriously. Make sure you have good evidence to support those reasons. If you're going to say, again, students should have free health care because it's a constitutional right, what evidence are you going to use to support that? Where are you going to get statistics? Who are you going to interview? What research that's already been done are you going to collect? What conclusions are you going to make to follow that up? And you have to acknowledge opposing viewpoints and limitations. No claim is perfect. Students should have free health insurance, and I talk about some of the opposing views, but I also have to acknowledge that there's going to be some difficulties in that claim. So I have to acknowledge some of those things. Now, let's say, now we've talked about some of the basics. I'm going to give you an argumentative assignment. Maybe it's create a documentary about a constitutional right that you think should be emphasized more, or create an argumentative essay addressing surveillance in the United States, or any country really now. Well, how do you go about figuring out what your argument's going to be, what your claim's going to be, what your reasons are going to be? Well, again, for me, I'm a big pattern person, I'm a big formula person, so I'm going to give you a step-by-step process. Now, I want you to practice this exactly this way first. Then after you've done this right, you can find your own methods that will be most effective for you. But you really can't find out your best method until you experience a method at all. So first thing, let's say I give you an assignment, or a professor gives you an assignment. Circle everything about how long it's got to be. Maybe that's page length or minute length when it's due. What kind of format is it? MLA, APA, Chicago system. What's the grading criteria? Always look at the rubric to understand how it's being assessed. So let's say, all right, so it's got to be 10 pages long, it's due in 2 months, I need MLA formatting, and they're really emphasizing claim writing, introducing and using evidence to support that claim. Okay, so I really got to make sure I'm emphasizing this, not talking about something here. What kind of argument do you have to write? Because there's lots of different argumentative pieces that you can do. It's not just state your claim, give me reasons. Well, think about what you have to do. Is it a definition argument? For instance, what is an athlete? You have to find suitable criteria to show that definition. What is global warming? What's the criteria you're going to use to define what some of these things are? What about an evaluation argument? You do this a lot. Is this good or bad? Will this help people or hurt people? Is raising taxes on the rich, is that a good or a bad thing? What about a rebuttal argument? I'm giving you a source, I say, argue against it. That's a rebuttal argument. What about a proposal argument? Okay, so I am the mayor of a town or a large city, and I want to know what would be the most cost-effective and most efficient way that we can generate power and energy for our city. We're going to throw out all different options: nuclear, coal, wind, solar. Tell me which one's going to be the best. Or a narrative argument. Write about an issue using your own experiences. Now, narrative arguments are really not going to do a whole lot, but it's basically using your own experiences to try and prove a point. Doesn't mean you're persuading. No, you're still using reasons and evidence to support a claim here. So once you've determined what you need to do for this assignment, once you've determined what kind of argument you're going to write, now you've got to think about, well, what's my topic going to be? Now, a lot of us can get stuck on this very idea because it just seems so overwhelming. So what do? First, think about what you're doing in your course. Think about the readings that you've been given by your professor or teacher. Think about the lecture notes. Think about the discussions. Look through that to get a sense of, okay, what have we talked about in this class to give me a basis of where we can start. And think about what interests you. I was writing or helping to write a paper once on social justice issues in education. And so, myself, along with someone else, look through all the readings, the lecture notes, the discussions, to just see, all right, here are things that have been mentioned, here are things that have been emphasized. So there's some basic stuff. All right, now what do you think is the most interesting for me, for this other person? Once you've been able to look through that basis, think about possible issues you want to write about. And then always think about the because question. So let's say we're doing an evaluation argument. Is solar energy the most efficient form of energy production that the United States or England or China should go after? Yes, because, no, because. Get those down, because that'll give you some basic claims and basic reasons to start off with in looking at some of these topics. Now, once you've done that and you've written all those yes or no's, now you're going to narrow that list. You're going to put a check beside the issues that are most interesting for you to write about, because if you're looking at a possibility of a topic for an argument and you're bored by it, how bored do you think I'm going to be? So make sure that's something you're interested in. And things that you don't know very much about, put a question mark by it. That doesn't mean you have to throw it out, but that means you might have to do some more background research on that particular topic. Also, think about, if I know nothing about solar energy, you got to inform me about some of these basic things. Now, after you've done that, don't just choose one, choose about 2 or 3. Because honestly, you may really start digging into a topic and then realize, you know what, I really can't find good evidence to support these reasons. I need to change my argument. Well, if you don't have 2 or 3 others that you can get to, well, shoot, now you're back at square one. You've lost a lot of time. So let's say you've got those 2 or 3 topics. Now you're going to make another list, because you have to think about your readers, you have to think about the issues, you have to think about the counter arguments of what you might be making. So think about who's most interested in this. Think about, as a reader, am I going to be interested about this? Who does this affect? If we're talking about solar energy, that's going to affect normal people, that's going to affect energy businesses, oil, coal that already exists in the US. That may affect healthcare. That may affect the political scene. That may affect global trade because your country may not be trading with other countries. Well, that could create a diplomatic issue. Think about the pros and cons of this issue. Solar power, okay, what's good about it, what's bad about it, and what's already been written about this. Because when you figure out what's already been written, you could read that information, get some background in order to pursue that topic further. So let's say you've got those topics, you've answered those questions, so you got a good sense of, all right, here's kind of the lay of the land. Again, don't Leroy Jenkins into a topic. Get a lay of the land. So now that you've been able to analyze that, now we have to make a quick exploration of your topic. Whatever you've determined that your topic is going to be, we have to understand the different perspectives of your topic to really get a good sense about the pros and cons of an issue if we're talking about coal energy versus wind energy. And the best way to really explore that, a great way to graphically organize the information, is to make a map. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples just after this slide. Now, the reason why we try to explore a lot of the different perspectives about a topic is because every issue or every topic that's controversial today, it's not just a this perspective or another. There are a lot of sub-perspectives There's a lot of different pros and cons, and for you to really create a good argument on an issue, you have to understand all of them, all the points of view, or as many as you can find. And you need to be able to honestly know what is already happening in that subject. What are the debates that have been going on? What are the controversies that have already happened? This map will basically catch you up to the argument. So here are a couple of examples for you. First, this is a map about the pluses and minuses of coal energy. Now, of course, you don't have to draw anything. In fact, I'm a terrible artist. I would never draw that. But this gives you a sense of, all right, here are the pluses and minuses on coal energy. So maybe your argument is that wind energy is superior to coal energy, and you have your reasons and you're gathering your evidence. This map just gives you a sense of what the argument already is. So let's say you're comparing it, coal energy to wind energy, you do the same map for wind energy. If you notice, it's really not anything too complicated. You're just organizing your thoughts there. And the goal of this is, again, just to get into the conversation, to get you at a starting point where now you can gather evidence and being as objective as possible. Now, as you're gathering this evidence and creating your reasons for your argument, there are a couple of roles you need to take. Now, it's not just one role. You need to take all of these roles as you are researching your topic. The first is the role of a skeptic. Whenever you're reading information, read as if you are disagreeing with the authors. And the reasons why is because when you write your argument, your readers, or myself, we're expecting you to be persuasive about why you disagree. So you need to gather those valid counterclaims to really make a valid argument. So reading as a skeptic helps you with that. Contributor also helps a lot when you're reading these. So you're going to not only agree with their position, but you're going to add to their other point. So you're actually going to go a little bit farther and saying, well, this research helps to prove my claim because. The third role you want to take is an analyst. So this is really trying to be objective with a primary document, with a scientific study, with a video, with a poem, with a book, because you're going to be agreeing, or even you may disagree, but you can come to a different conclusion. So you're going to read this, you may agree while disagreeing with some other points. If you take that piece of research from all perspectives, you'll be able to use it in a multitude of ways to create the best argument. I think a lot of times as we look at research, we have a particular mindset in mind, and it really narrows the perspectives that we can come from and really hampers us in trying to create an effective argument. So here's an example analyst point of view. And again, we have our example claim up there. And if you notice, the author is identifying the summary of that particular article, but also is critiquing it at the same time. Now, if you were a skeptic, you would just point out all the things wrong with it. If you were a contributor, you would point out everything right and then how that was affecting your claim, and this is an analyst's point of view. It's a great way to do this with your research, and I would highly suggest when you're doing this, you always write your claim down, your working thesis / claim. And the reason why is because you're always keeping in mind that this is what you're trying to prove. This is your main idea. Now, as you're trying to find good reasons for your claim, you have to think about how you're going to argue. Now, that can be definition argument, cause arguments, proposal arguments, rebuttal arguments, but think about what you're trying to argue. For instance, can you argue this point or your claim by definition? And I love this example of what an athlete is, because look at this example here. Figure skaters are athletes because true athletes train for and compete in physical sporting competitions that require special competence and precision. Because you could say, all right, people who lift weights are athletes, but they're not necessarily competing in physical sporting conditions. You could say, what does training for mean? So you're arguing by definition here. If you can get your audience to accept your definition, then you're going to create an effective argument. Because if you haven't set up the proper criteria for what you're trying to prove, it's not going to be very effective. Think about, can you argue from value? So this would be an evaluation argument. Is something good or not good because? Now, the key for those kinds of arguments when you write them is to find the appropriate criteria and convince your readers that those are the right criteria. If you're going to say, well, wind energy is better than coal energy because, but you're really not specifying what the criteria are for good energy, because I could make the case that, hey, good energy is cheap, so coal energy is better than wind energy or solar energy. Think about, can you argue from conscience? Can you say that, hey, if we create more solar and wind energy in our country, good things are going to follow? Can you point that out? Can you provide evidence to support that? For instance, and this is a causal argument example, DDT, which is a pesticide, should not be sprayed on a massive scale because it will poison animals and people. Hey, you know what? If we don't do that, bad things are going to happen. If we eliminate that, good things will happen. What about a proposal argument? Lanes of bicycles would encourage more people to ride bikes to work. What are the consequences of the argument that you're making? If you're going to make an argument, but you're not talking about the good things that are going to come about from it, it's not going to be a strong argument. Your readers aren't going to want to do anything in your conclusion when you're giving them a call to action. Think about, can you counter objectives to your position? And I love this quote, this statement, because you always have to think about it as you're researching. But what about this? Again, sometimes I think when we're researching, our minds are so narrowed into looking at one perspective and trying to prove that we're right and not allowing ourselves to think about the objections to what we're researching. And another great tip for finding good reasons is use current, valid, and reliable sources. If you're using a newspaper that is highly biased, that is an article that is 15 years old, that current research hasn't validated, it's not going to improve your argument. In fact, it's going to destroy your argument because you're using old, outdated, unreliable, biased evidence for your reasons and your claims. So now that you've been able to go over some of these guidelines for finding good evidence, well, how do we find evidence to support the good reasons in your claim? Well, here are some basic examples. Hard data. These are numbers, these are surveys, usually done on a large scale by a reputable polling group sampling a wide variety of people of different age groups and perspectives. Having certain examples. So if I'm going to say, again, that solar energy or wind energy is more important than coal and more effective at coal, I'm going to cite examples in other places, in other countries, and how that has been more effective. What about personal experiences? This can come, especially if you're doing a narrative argument, from your own experiences, from experiences of others. Statistics are fantastic. Again, numbers have a very strong pull-in argument because they're objective. If you're talking to an expert in the field, yes, they will have a lot of credibility, but they may be biased. Whereas statistics, hard numbers, hard data are really effective. Now here's something I really want you to think about. Arguments that are unsuccessful fail not because you don't have good reasons. A lot of times you have fantastic reasons. I was talking to a student the other day, and she was making a claim that school should start at 10 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. And she gave good reasons. Hey, you know, students function better in the later hours of the morning, and it'll give us more time for homework. Okay, that's nice. But it was a terrible argument because that person could not cite any evidence to support the reasons they're giving. The reasons were fine, but there was no evidence to back it up. Who are you and why should I listen to you? So make sure there's always enough evidence to support the good reasons. Now, as you're going through, you also have to think about, well, how much evidence do I really necessarily need for this argument? Now here's the general rule. When you don't know, just err on the side of giving too much evidence. There's nothing wrong necessarily with giving too much evidence as long as you are still making your own conclusions and putting it together in a way that's your own. If you're just giving me evidence, and you're not putting any of your own information in there, you're not creating a good argument. One other thing to note is that if you think that one of your reasons you're giving in your claim is really going to be hard for your readers to get to believe, you're going to need much more evidence to convince them. Again, if your readers are if they have a lot of objections to your reason, you're going to have to prove it with more evidence. Now, how do you choose the right evidence. Now that I think about, okay, how much evidence do I give? What are examples of evidence? Well, how do I know what's appropriate? And the key is you have to be very discriminating. Because if you choose the wrong sources, it's going to destroy your argument. If you choose the wrong evidence, it will destroy your argument. So here's some things to think about. Which of these reasons that you're going to create lines up most closely with your views? What are most likely to resonate with your audience? Would it be more effective to focus on one line of an argument or to address several reasons in your position? So when you're trying to think about evidence, think about, okay, so here's my claim, here are my reasons. What reasons line up with my own particular views? And that'll kind of help you identify the bias that you have to make sure you're not trying to find bias evidence. What's going to resonate with your audience? If you know that your readers are coming from a West Virginia coal mining town and everyone in that town makes money off the coal industry, well, then you're going to have to pick evidence to convince them that wind energy is better, and you're going to have to use evidence that would convince them more properly. Also, think about it. If you're going to focus on one particular reason, or are you going to focus on lots of reasons? Because if you're focusing on one main reason, then you're going to choose different evidence that if you are having multiple reasons. Because if you're doing multiple reasons, your evidence still all has to come together and it can't conflict. So you have to be very careful with that. Don't pick and choose evidence that misrepresents the intent of the person that you are trying to convince. Make sure that the evidence you're choosing is being interpreted properly. If you're citing a quote from an expert and you're trying to use that for your argument, and what you cite is not at all what the expert's actually trying to say, it's going to destroy the argument that you're making. Now, when you're trying to find evidence, you always have to think about two ideas. Is this evidence relevant, and is it sufficient? Now, if we're looking at this from an academic perspective, relevance is how appropriate is the evidence at hand. Okay, I've got some evidence here, but is it really appropriate for the argument that I'm trying to make? So let's say if we're using computer software and you're making an argument that the Apple operating system is more functional and more efficient than the Windows operating system. Well, you could provide evidence from a narrative perspective and say, hey man, I had a PC, then I went to a Mac, and I love that operating system. And that's really great, but is that really going to help prove your argument? Because you're just a person. What is a better source of evidence? Well, maybe a journal article. Maybe some surveys, maybe some hard data citing the effectiveness and efficiency of a Mac operating system rather than the Windows operating system. Also think about sufficiency. If you're going to make an argument, you have to make sure you have enough evidence to successfully prove the argument that you're making. So if you're going to use a single piece of evidence, which can be used, you have to make sure it is really, really strong, and you have to make sure it's enough. Now, normally it's not, because you want to have lots of different evidence from multiple perspectives, from multiple sources to really bolster your argument. And honestly, people usually expect more than one piece if they're really trying to be convinced of something. I mean, you could just spout something from an expert and you could say, all right, but you know, there are a lot of different perspectives in that field of, let's say, clean energy or efficient energy. What do they think? Because you could just be the mouthpiece of one particular person. So that's something to really think about as well. That you've created your claim, organized good reasons, got sufficient evidence. Now, how are you going to explain that in your argument? What is going to be your organizational pattern? I love this picture here because it's a pattern. It might be a little crazy. It might not be my cup of tea, but it's certainly a pattern. There are two patterns that you can really choose from. And the important thing is looking at your points and counterpoints. So one example you could take is a sequential pattern. You express your main points, your reasons, you provide the evidence to support them. After you've done all that, you address the counterpoints. Or you could do an alternating pattern, where you pull out your point or your reason, you provide evidence, and then you address the counterpoint to that particular reason. Then you do a second one, then you do a third one. Now, what does that really look like? So here's a particular example for you, and I apologize that the wording is a little bit difficult to see. If we're looking at it from a sequential standpoint, you've got 3 points maybe for this particular reason. It would be immoral to experiment on human beings as research subjects for new proposed cosmetics, and then provide evidence. Second point, regulations about the treatment of animal subjects ensure they are treated humanely, then give evidence. Point C, research using animals has led to numerous medical advances, then give me your evidence. Then look at the counterpoint. So the counterpoint to A, the counterpoint to B, and the counterpoint to C. Now that's one way to create a sequential argument where you give your reasons, you provide the evidence for that, and then you address the counterpoints. An alternating perspective is give me your point, and it would be immoral to experiment on human beings as research subjects for new proposed cosmetics. And then give me your counterpoint. It is immoral to exploit animals solely to benefit people. You can choose either one as long as they are both there. Your reasons, your evidence, and counterpoints. If you're lacking any of those, then you're not creating a valid argument. Now, when you're writing this, make sure you're not, and I had a lot of issues with this with my US history class when we were first starting to write claims and reasons and evidence, is my students would just give me a quote, then give me another quote, then give me another quote, then give me another quote, without much of an introduction, without connecting the quotes together at all, and not really thinking about the claim that they were trying to make originally. So don't just string together reasons and sources without explaining how they fit together. Everything has to be cohesive. It's not a, think of it as an argument successfully isn't like a locker where you have all these different files and you can pull out different files and different file cabinets. It's not like that. They're not all separate but still together. It's like a giant ball of spaghetti. It's almost like it's just all molded and formed in there, and you can't really tell where the separation is because everything should be tied necessarily together. Everything connects to something. Central to your argument, and this is really important, should be your position. Now, why do I say that? Well, let's take a look at this particular example. Here are 2 different examples of an argument. So this first one, and I'm not going to read them out for you, but if you notice, this first one is really emphasizing who the expert is that they're about to cite. Whereas if you're reading the second one, the center focus is your particular topic, your issue, your reason, and your claim. Now, the reason why you always want to make that central is because you always want the reader to think about what you're trying to prove. Instead of focusing on the wrong things, have them focus on the right things. If we lose our focus on what you're trying to say, and again, if you notice, the wording is pretty much the same, it's just where everything falls. And I know that's a bit of an English teacher thing to say, but it's really important on how you word things in your argument. We will be talking about that in future videos. Well, that ends our video for today. Hope you learned something you did not know before. Thanks for watching.